When it comes to choosing books, Greg and I take a rather random approach. There is no particular method to it, and so we end up reviewing a variety of literature and texts. We have covered to date historical research, biographies, fiction and non-fiction, and here today we cover an extended academic essay. Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence analyzes how political systems treat 50% of the population. It is a tough and gritty text because it is forthright and argumentative. It is provocative not because it says something controversial, but because it dares to express truths. We live in democracies that are deeply flawed. A simple glance at the state of the Epstein case in the USA says it all, but if you look at social media, you will find encyclopedias of misogyny readily presented by men of all kinds and cultures. And the systems in place to manage and monitor public spaces, both online and offline, are ineffective and biased. It is for this reason that Greg and I, two males, decided to review this book. We do not speak on behalf of anyone but ourselves, and our perspective is clear. Women deserve to stand at the very top of all business and governmental and social institutions. In fact, civilization requires it. The level of injustice and corruption around the world is off the charts, and the simplest way to change that is to get more and more women into positions of power and influence. As Professor Ghodsee says very clearly, unregulated capitalism is bad for women. Thank you, Greg, for your time and analysis. This is TwoandaMic. Rise up and be curious.
Dung weche pek kod welo mabiro e TwoandaMic. Dung parodit kod jok mawuoye TwoandaMic. Seche tin sud buta wawinji e TwoandaMic. Wala wachokre, wabed piny, bi wawinje, ero chako, momit ndi, podcast makende.
There you go.
Where'd I put it?
I don't know. Find it.
Oh,
Find it.
no.
Find it.
Oh,
Find
no.
it.
This is bad news.
It is. This might, and to be honest,
I've lost all my notes, which is
mate.
distressing.
But if it was on Word, then it should be saved, right?
It was
like-
in the inbox. Hold on. So what? Okay, so this book was called "Why Women." No, is it why
Yeah.
women
Have better sex
Have-
under socialism
better sex after socialism? Is that right?
and other arguments for economic independence.
Yeah. No, because I put it as the initials of that when I did it.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's why. So I just needed to find that. Done it. I've got it
Yeah.
back. We are back. We are cooking with gas.
Yeah. Respect. Okay. Ready to go?
No, wait.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's on you. Where you
Good.
going?
Good.
Okay, put that there. Who's that there?
I was about to say I am welcomed, and I hope I am, but I actually welcome Greg, indeed, in turn, back for another go at the book club.
Thank you. I consider myself welcomed, and I welcome you.
Thank you. I love being welcomed into my own seat. Today's going to be one of those extremely efficient thingamajigs.
I'll leave now then, shall I?
Well, I was going to say, because we both have responsibilities. You have to sign a deal worth millions and millions of lira, and I have to man a barricade somewhere or other. But in between, we're going to do a review of a very interesting book written by Professor Kristen R. Ghodsee. I'm going to pronounce it that way because I'm going to try to maintain some consistency, and that's probably the easiest way to do it. And the book is very interestingly titled, Why Women Have Better Sex Under Socialism and Other Arguments for Economic Independence. I'm almost tempted to mumble the last part and other arguments for economic limits, because some people may believe, oh no, it's only the first part that counts. But for Professor Ghodsee, it's actually more important, and it was more important that the second part was introduced. It seems as though the first part was one of those things people use. I think it's called a hook.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I could see why for her it was important. I think as a serious academic, she probably wanted to have the economic portion of that title made red bold. But I suspect that the people who are in charge of printing the books, publishers, wanted to sell more books. Yeah. So sex does sell, apparently.
So I've been told. Anyway, let's jump into it, because there are a number of extremely interesting components to the book, and as Dr. Ghodsee says herself, I think two of the main chapters do kind of refer to sex, and so therefore, as you say, for her it was quite understandable that the book would be entitled as it was. But this is very far from being one of those. It's not an educational book which suggests socialists are better skilled in certain ways. It's actually talking about the background institutional element and component of life within which women are better represented and therefore more empowered in a way which introduces equality. And so it's through that medium of equality whereby this statement is more accurate, right?
Yeah, I don't think at any point she's trying to make a case specifically for either communism or socialism, even in the way that it was experienced in the east of Europe, most famously. I don't think she's saying that it was a better system overall, or even that it was structured in a way that was favourable toward women. None of that is necessarily true. But what I think she was trying to say is that because everyone was 100% employed in the same way, and there was no distinction drawn between men and women in terms of being employed by the state, it meant that women's sexuality was not for sale in the same way that it was in the West at the time.
Mm-hmm. And even to
this day, absolutely. I mean, of course, the very interesting points that she raises about what's happened since then, especially to do with East and West Germany, because obviously that's one portion where two countries were very much one before and after the Berlin Wall, and we see the differences of the experiences of people in East and West Germany. Possibly, a lot better than I do about that side of things.
I've come to learn. Obviously, I live in Berlin, but this is again something that I've come to learn based on what the people I work with have told me. So obviously, I haven't experienced it myself, and as much as I like to say, with my heightened sense of empathy, that I can get lots from the books that I read and the programs that I watch. But to listen to people speak about it, the way in which they speak about it, the emotion with which they communicate, really kind of drives home a lot of the issues which still, in my opinion, prevail in a unified Germany. But that's, again, it's not necessarily a different topic, because it does refer in many ways to economics and society. But yeah, let's kind of go back to what Dr. or Professor Ghodsee wants to talk about. Yeah, the economic argument is extremely important. But I mean, there are a few more background issues that perhaps we wanted to address before we went into a few more details with regards to the book. First of all, it's a particularly short book, as in people shouldn't think about this book because it's obviously quite academic. This isn't a tome. This isn't gonna take up, I don't know, 3.5 meters on your bookshelf. But having said that, for a short book, it definitely packs a punch, doesn't it?
I agree. Yes, there's a lot of information there, and apparently, I mean, in the introduction, she does mention that originally this was written from a very US-centric point of view, and she, in order to publish, she had to extend the book to include anecdotes and stories to include Europe and the UK. So she had to go and do a bit more research around that, and so it would have been an even shorter book. I suspect, little more than an essay to begin with. So yeah, look, there's definitely a lot of information packed into it, and she certainly makes bold arguments for why she feels the way she does, and yeah, definitely I found it very interesting, and I found her arguments quite compelling.
Yep. So let's also address the fact that here we are, two men, cis men, talking about a topic which relates specifically to women. We could have avoided this book. Obviously, there are 38 trillion other books that we could have read. But we don't want to avoid doing so on the basis of our agenda. This is an interesting book, and we feel it should be addressed, and that's why we're talking about it. There are obviously opinions and perspectives that we cannot cover and we cannot represent, but that's not what we're trying to do. You and I have read a book. We're going to analyze and review the book on its merits from our perspective of who we are as individuals. And then we're going to offer that to other people. And it's for them to then decide what they wish to do with both our review and their own thoughts. Now, going back a bit into the background of the book, because we've spoken about this book a couple of times. And for you, it was quite interesting. One of the initial stories she presents as to how she wanted to participate in a political discussion as a younger academic. Do you want to recount that particular tale?
If I recall it correctly, it was that she within her university setting they had a United Nations mock-up almost, where students were allowed to come in and make arguments on behalf of the nation they were representing, and for one reason or another, she was left with Russia. Or the Soviet Union as an available member for her to represent, and that's what she did to the best of her ability. And it appears that she found some way in which to represent them in a pretty positive light within the parameters of the arguments that she was making. So it seems to have certainly piqued her interest that she's gone back to study it in greater depth, in greater detail, and has made a career out of it.
Yeah, it's uniquely interesting in some ways, because by being forced by the male participants within her group to pursue that way, that line, she actually discovered certain elements which, as you say, are for her, or were for her, more representative of women's interests through the socialist institutional method. But she was forced into that because basically, even in those days, and we're not talking too long ago, she basically said that the men were the ones who felt it was their job to deliver political opinion, especially to represent the West. So all the popular countries in the West, with regards to the UN Security Council, UK, France, USA, they were basically dominated by men. Mm-hmm. And she had no chance. The basically, I don't know, the waiting list or whatever order by whatever means of analysis or evaluation was necessary, it was such a long list, she had no chance. So she had to go the Soviet Union route. And as you say, she found something there which she could actually genuinely latch onto. Now, something which she talks about during one of her reading sessions thereafter is that people have criticized her for being, you're pro-Soviet, you're pro-communist, and so on. For a start, and we can't go into the depth of it, but for a start, the representation of the ideas of communism and socialism in the West are extremely inaccurate. Communism, which I'm not going to justify because I've read the Communist Manifesto, which was written over 100 years ago, and I have to say, at least the half of it, I think you could just get rid of. I don't agree with any of that. But that doesn't mean that there are no principles within that particular body of words, of essays, or we should take into consideration. And I think that's what she's trying to say in her speech, is that basically whenever we want to represent the most negative of a contrarian opinion, we always pick out the most extreme. So if somebody wants to talk about socialism, especially when they're really ignorant of what socialism means, they say, look at the Soviet Union. Look what they did. Look how many people Stalin killed. And she brought this great example whereby she's saying, okay, but then if you are going to analyze capitalism or the free market, then we can bring up the slave trade. If you want to analyze capitalism, then it is through that which you should look at it. So why should anybody agree to capitalism or the free market as being the best economic model? Look what happened there. So she does kind of say to people straight away, don't just jump in with your prejudices of anti-communism, anti-socialism, anti-East. It's a lot more nuanced than that.
Of course it is. I mean, she does make the argument herself in the book, where she says, I use the term democratic socialism to refer to countries where socialist principles are championed by parties that compete in free and fair elections, where political rights are maintained. Although many parties refer to themselves as communist, that term denotes the ideal of a society where all economic assets are collectively owned and the state and law have withered away. In no case has real communism been achieved. She makes that case early on in the book. Yeah. So I wholly agree with that. And furthermore, and I think we've spoken about this before, I would suggest that real democracy has also never been achieved. So where we have these two differing systems, which appear to be on the left and right, let's say, of a scale, I think in reality they exist more like the two ends of a circle, which almost it's like the Ouroboros snake that's reaching its own tail. They are not, everyone looks at it as far left and far right, and I think in reality they are far more similar in their extremes. Indeed. Than people realize.
Indeed, the head and the tail, in particular. Yeah. Yeah, and she also points out one of the lines which really captured me was, unregulated capitalism is bad for women. And I found that in itself to be a line which I think a lot of people really have to look at and think about and try to understand where it comes from. Because in a lot of the arguments that she presents thereafter, she gives examples which are relevant today, especially when you look at the rise of political parties which are more to the right. And people think about the right as though they are the bastions of patriotism, that these are the only people who are going to protect their nations. This couldn't be further from the truth. And there are lots of reasons why that may be the case. But to bring it back to it being relevant to this book, when you have a political ideology which essentially forces at least half of the population to behave in a certain way, which is not in their interests, that political ideology is neither democratic, nor can it be really considered patriotic. Because no matter how many people may want to define what patriotism means, it's not simply loyalty to the political leadership, the constitution, whether it's codified or not, and the flag, but also to the people of that nation. And if you automatically within your political ideology want to remove the rights of half of the people within that country, then surely that cannot be patriotic.
Yeah, Unfortunately, patriotism means a lot of things to a lot of people now, and very little of it is actually patriotic. We have become a very selfish, or groups of individuals around the world, and we are very self-interested. We find our little cliques, people who generally tend to think like us, and forgetting whether we follow an ideology, a religion, or anything else, it generally is to the detriment of anyone else who is not within that clique. So unfortunately, what many people see as patriotism towards their own country, won't go around waving their flag, whether that's the flag of St. George or the flag of America, it makes no difference. They are often just doing so to the exclusion of others and just painting themselves into a very small group.
Yeah.
Be that even 10 million strong, it doesn't matter. As taken as a whole, as a population of the greater humanity, it's tiny.
Indeed. And just to further emphasize this, Donald Trump or the White House recently released a bit of PR for a racing event, and they presented it as one nation, one race.
Hilarious.
Yeah, which obviously, as in we don't even have to think that it hints towards this is just open racism. And so therefore, this is one of the reasons why Professor Ghodsee has made the arguments that she's made. It's that people kind of realize that there is an inherent connection between the ideologies of a certain kind, if they remain unregulated, which is emphasized by a system which seeks to profit from the subjugation, in this case, specifically of women. But you could also go out wider and talk about immigrants and people from, should we say, more working classes. But obviously her argument is for women in this case. Do you take the examples that she's given, and can you see that these could be situations which people might fall back into if indeed certain political parties are elected or are re-elected, either in the US, the UK, or beyond?
She does give a couple of interesting little asides, little stories to demonstrate what she means in practical terms. There's the story of her friend she makes up the names of Lisa, who often fights with her husband around financial matters. And she paints the picture that she is a kind of lady who's got married and has had to utilize her sexuality in order to have a life made for her by her husband who goes to work and gives her money when she needs to go out and enjoy herself. She says that they went out for dinner, for example, and when it came to time to pay the bill, Kristen put down her card to pay, and the lady pulled out a $20 bill, which all her husband had given her to go out with. As it turned out, Kristen told her, "Well, money away, and I'll cover this one." But I think that was more used to make the point of how some women, not all obviously, but some women in scenarios where the husband is going out and becoming the breadwinner in the household, he takes control of the financial aspects of her life to such a degree that it controls how and when she goes out. And of course, to that end, she's absolutely right. That is terrible. That anybody should have to use their body, let's say, even in hot with their husband, in order to earn the right to go out alone with friends or whatever, rather than being able to, go to work, it's normal, and earn money in their own right. But that's an extreme example, if you like, of this. It exists everywhere. Have countless examples of women who, let's say, get to a certain stage in an interview process, but then won't get hired because it's understood that at some point, if they're of age, they may wish to go and have children at some time, and that's used by companies to not hire women for certain positions because they don't want them to take 9 months off, for example. So that's just another example, another way in which women are held back within our systems in the West.
Yeah, and she also brings in the other examples of where women's time is essentially not appreciated, not within the economic sense, nor within the dedication element of it. When there are dependents who require care, either being children or elderly or people with disabilities within the family, quite often that falls down to the wife of a couple to take care of, and not the husband. She also gives the example of employment contracts. She gives the example of promotions. She gives a number of different kinds of examples where essentially women's rights, even when it's not specifically named as targeting women, but the laws themselves target women. And this is the kind of inequality which she refers to, because the independence that women have is limited in the sense that they have to provide certain services, whether it's domestic cooking, cleaning, or taking care of people, but they are not remunerated in any way for those services. And in fact, when those services have been left to others to do, they're not done. So there is a clear practical issue with regards to this and the essence of responsibility. Now, recently I've read that there is a growing trend now on behalf of men who have taken responsibility a bit more themselves, and so they dedicate 2.5 or 2.7 hours per week more to taking care of their children, to looking after the home and doing the chores. But this is a change that has only been introduced in the last 1.5 or 2 years. And I say introduced, it's been taken on voluntarily by the men. But that is an extremely small percentage change in comparison to the amount of responsibility that women have on a domestic basis. For women to be better represented within the economy, there needs to be a lot more regulation. More regulation automatically suggests a more socialist or a more social economy rather than free market. Judging by the way that a lot of political parties represent their political discourse, for example, Reform in the UK, for example, MAGA in the USA, and other parties, the AfD in Germany, Marine Le Pen's party in France, and so on. Judging by the way that these people represent their wish for unregulated capitalism, how do you see this equality element as a debate, as an issue going forward in the next few years?
We need to have more women in power. It's that simple. And they need to be empowered as well. So it's one thing having quotas, which we've seen in many countries where you have to have X number of women either in parliament or as she mentions in certain countries in let's say Denmark and Norway, we have certain percentages of people who would be on the board of companies. But we need to have them at the very top. How many actual CEOs are women of these companies? I say when you actually look at the number of those in control, it's far lower. So in order for women to be taken more seriously, I think we have to have them put in control of countries, in control of organizations, on the boards, and as CEOs of major corporations. And then I think things will slowly start to improve. I think it's interesting that, for example, here men are now encouraged to take as much time off to look after children as women are, because I think that will also help to take away the stigma behind childbirth. I think it's another important factor. Men are seen as being better in certain jobs. Sometimes that may be borne out in studies, but most of the time I'd suggest it isn't. It's just if men have always held those posts and they've always had them in the past, then they're always going to be seen as the ones who are better at those jobs. However, if women are given a chance to do them as well, they could probably find that they could do them equally as well as men do. For the majority of jobs, I mean, I'm not suggesting we should have an army made up of just women. That's probably never going to happen in our time. But in essence, I don't think there's an argument to say that men are better than women at any specific job role if the women are given equal opportunity to take part.
Exactly. And for that opportunity to be created, you need a social dynamic with regards to the application of law and opportunity, which doesn't exist within a free market. And she gave, Professor Ghodsee gave another good example of a friend of hers who hired a woman, and he strongly recommended it to his boss. The woman became a star employee until she had a baby. When she had a baby, after that, she came back to work within 2 or 3 months. I think it wasn't particularly long, but when she did, she found it very difficult to be able to focus in meetings. She didn't sleep very often. She was always tired. Her timekeeping was a bit more lax because you just simply can't predict the needs of an infant child, because her husband was always traveling and so was never around in the city. And so basically this star employee had to leave. And Professor Ghodsee's friend said, well, that's the last time I employ a woman, purely because of the lack of support and understanding that the company had for the needs of an infant child. And the thing is, what I found quite heavily represented within this book is the way in which people produce arguments against women, against the need to take care of relatives, against the need for child care, looking after children, having children, if a society doesn't have children, they die out.
Yeah.
As in, you don't have to be particularly intelligent to understand that. And so therefore, that means you need to have the mechanisms in place to support that process. You also need to protect the people who have kids, right?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate in many ways that our societies in the West particularly have become quite short-term and have short-term mentality when it comes to the economic debate and also the political debate. So in terms of our politics, no government in the UK can think much beyond 4 years, because any more than that and they won't get re-elected. So this kind of short-termism doesn't lead to what is better for the economy or the country as a whole in the long term or even the medium term, because they're not allowed to govern in that way. Whereas there are countries where you look at them and you think, okay, the person in charge of it is pretty much a an autocrat. But as terrible as they may be as a person, sometimes that does allow them to have a long-term goal. Whether or not they use it in the right way is another issue, because there's plenty of examples where they haven't. But one of the drawbacks of having a democratic election in the way that we do and how we see in the UK is it means that our system of government is always looking at the next set of elections, and therefore it's never looking at more than 4 years down the line. It's similar with our economics as well, because every company has an annual general meeting, and at that meeting you have to present to your shareholders what you've done over the past year. And if the results aren't seen as great, your share price suffers. If your share price suffers, certain members of the board are voted out, and in some instances the CEO loses his job. So his job is basically year on year to provide growth and to provide enough income to the shareholders to keep them appeased as well. Again, it doesn't help with long-term planning. Of course, that's something within a company structure which it does allow for. Certainly, at your annual general meeting, you could make arguments for that. Say, look, within 3, 5, 10 years, we expect this to happen. But a lot of the issues I think we're finding now is because of short-term gains and short-term thinking in the way that we run our companies in our countries.
Yeah, and just to reiterate the point, we are both Democrats in a sense that we believe in a democratic system. However, a democratic system can only truly exist if you objectively look at the weaknesses of that system and try to find a way to solve problems, which is a bit like what Little Arms sent us today, with the theorizing that people are no longer problem solvers. They use data as a means of justifying decisions, but those decisions don't necessarily solve the issues at hand. They just address the data that's being presented. Yeah. And that was quite an interesting argument. And therefore, the presenter was talking about the need for creativity within the process. And that's what's lacking. Being somebody who, like myself, I consider myself a socialist, in essence, a social democrat in practicality, we have to identify the problems that we have within society. And we have to find solutions to those problems. Simply presenting data or economic growth as a target which needs to be attained and maintained at all costs doesn't address the underlying problems within society. No. Nor does it address the inequality which women may experience, nor indeed other genders.
To give an example which many may understand very, very plainly, I often think back to the time when within the NHS, doctors were given extra responsibility, which involved not so much treating patients, but filling out forms. And those forms they filled out were then sent centrally to the governors of the hospitals, and the hospitals reported up the chain. And eventually it came to government. And those forms were basically so that along the line, they could show how many more people have been treated and how much time we spent on this. And in the end, it was just a box ticking exercise. But what it actually meant were doctors were spending somewhere between 10 and 15 hours a week on paperwork as opposed to treating patients. Now, it may be there's some element of gain to be had from this, but surely a doctor's time is better spent making those who are ill better than filling out paperwork, or indeed a policeman's time is better, protecting society and arresting criminals rather than filling out paperwork in order so that we can present data at the end of the year. Those sorts of exercises where the data becomes the object of the reason to do something, I think this actually defeats the purpose of the job in the first place.
Definitely. Unfortunately, because time is as it is, never ending in one way, doesn't want to stand still on the other hand, we need to bring it to a conclusion. And one of the ways in which we do that normally is we decide whether or not, or you decide whether or not you would recommend this book for others to read. Would you do so?
I would very much recommend this book for Nigel Farage to read. Yes,
and others,
and anyone else as well, but particularly Nigel, please.
Yeah, indeed. Well, considering some of the reforms candidates don't even read their own policies, it's a bit hard to expect them to read a book like this one, which challenges the basis for which they have created those policies, which their representatives don't even read. It has to be said, though, as in, I love the book. I went through it twice, and the arguments I found to be extremely eye-opening. We haven't addressed anywhere near as many as there are represented within the book. It's heavy going. It's heavy going because the material really demands attention. As you said before, there's a lot of information in there, but it's not just the information, it's the analysis. It's trying to understand the nuances of what is represented, and also, in some ways, comparing and analyzing the situations in which we find ourselves, because it's not just one reality. The USA is different, the UK is different, Germany is different, France is different, and so on. So being able to analyze the realities in which we exist as individuals and the examples which are presented within the book. And I find that challenging.
It is indeed challenging. It is indeed. And I think because it's written by an academic, that makes the book challenging. Of course, I mean, if she wasn't an academic, then it wouldn't be as interesting a read, but it might be an easier read, but it certainly wouldn't be packed with the information it is and the foresight that she has. But she makes many, many strong arguments. I'll do one more if we have time, which is she says within the book, under the capitalist system, women found themselves worse off than men, as capitalism has made slaves of men, and then by paying them through men, made her his slave. She became the slave of a slave, which is the worst kind of slavery. And that's from George Bernard Shaw.
Mm.
So, but she quotes Shaw in her book. And that's an interesting aside that, from a pretty good author. There's lots of great stuff in this book. And I would very much encourage people who want to see how there are other ways, and she goes into different societies and how they do certain aspects and how they fix certain parts. It's important to say that nobody anywhere in the world has ever got it right. Nowhere has any of the true political systems that we have available to us, nowhere has anyone got them anywhere close to being 100%. Anywhere. So let's start from the basis that humans are imperfect. We understand that. So any systems that we try to put forward are probably going to be imperfect too. All we can do is challenge those imperfections where we see them, and see if we can fix the ones we can. We will never be able to fix them all.
Did you enjoy it?
Yes.
Super. All right. Do you have our compliments, by the way, Professor Ghodsee?
Yes.
Do you have a suggestion for our next read?
I think I did say to you earlier that I'd quite like to do The Poet at some point. Is that something you're up for?
Yeah, go on. The Poet by Michael Connolly, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Michael Connolly's The Poet. Okay, super. Good. Greg, I appreciate your time as always. Love to the family.
You too.
Speak to you soon, brother.
Indeed. Take care, mate. Bye-bye.